On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was finally over. The gunfire stopped. The flags fell. But for millions of German soldiers, this wasn't the end of the war. It was the beginning of something far more uncertain. Roughly 8 million German men had served in Hitler's military by the end of the conflict. When the regime collapsed, these men were left scattered across Europe, broken, hunted, and unwanted. Some surrendered to Allied forces. Others ran. Many simply disappeared.
We often talk about what happened to nations after World War II. The rebuilding, the trials, the division of Germany. But what about the soldiers, the ordinary troops, the officers, even the SS? What happened to them when the Reich crumbled? Their stories are rarely told. Some faced justice, some were quietly recruited, and others vanished into new lives, under new names, in faraway places. If you're fascinated by these hidden chapters of history, make sure you subscribe and stay with us until the end, because the truth behind what happened to these men will surprise you. In the final days of World War II, the Wehrmacht, which was the unified armed forces of Nazi Germany, was in total disarray. As defeat became inevitable, panic swept through the ranks. Entire units disbanded. Deserters disguised themselves as civilians. Officers destroyed documents and abandoned equipment. Many German soldiers had one goal: surrender to the Western Allies. The United States and Britain were seen as more humane captors, compared to the Soviets, who were feared for their brutal vengeance after years of Nazi atrocities on the Eastern Front. But surrender wasn't a guarantee of safety. Captured soldiers were divided between the occupying forces: Americans, British, French, and Soviets, and their fate often depended on location and luck. But if the Western Allies were seen as the safe option, what actually awaited those who surrendered to them? The answer was far more grim than many expected. In the American zone, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were packed into open-air detention sites known as the Rheinwiesenlager or Rhine Meadow camps. These were makeshift enclosures with no real shelter. Prisoners dug holes for cover, slept in the rain, and lived in filth. Estimates vary, but death tolls from disease, exposure, and starvation may have reached 50,000 or more, though the exact number is still debated by historians. British and French captors fared only slightly better. In France, prisoners were put to work as forced labor, rebuilding the war-torn country. Some worked in dangerous conditions, clearing minefields. Many wouldn't be released until 1948, and some stayed captive as late as 1950. Meanwhile, denazification efforts were underway. Soldiers were interrogated and sorted by category: major offender, offender, lesser offender, or exonerated. But the system was flawed. Some actual war criminals went free, while others were wrongly accused and imprisoned without trial. And yet, for all the hardship in the West, what happened in the East was even more brutal. Roughly 3 million German soldiers were captured by the Soviet Union. These men were seen not just as enemies, but as symbols of Nazi aggression, and Stalin's revenge was merciless. Most were sent to Gulags, forced labor camps spread across Siberia, Ukraine, and Central Asia. There, they faced freezing temperatures, starvation, disease, and backbreaking labor. Prisoners built railroads, dug canals, and worked in coal mines, often with little food or rest. Death was common. Some estimate that over 1 million German POWs died in Soviet captivity, although exact numbers are hard to confirm. Some were used as political propaganda, forced to attend re-education programs, confess guilt, or denounce the Nazi regime in staged public performances. And the suffering didn't end quickly. Some German POWs weren't released until 1955, a full decade after the war ended. Families back home assumed they were dead, but not all of Germany's soldiers were punished. Some were given new homes, new jobs, and even celebrated in the countries that once vowed to destroy them. As the Cold War began,
Both the US and the Soviet Union recognized something chilling. They needed Germany's top minds. Through Operation Paperclip, the US secretly recruited over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and military experts, many of whom had ties to the Nazi regime. Their records were altered, their pasts quietly ignored. Among them was Werner von Braun, a former SS officer and lead designer of the V-2 rocket. These rockets, developed using slave labor from concentration camps, had rained destruction on London. And yet, von Braun would go on to design the Saturn V rocket for NASA, the one that is said to have carried Apollo 11 to the moon in 1969. America celebrated him as a hero. Few knew the full truth. This wasn't just moral compromise, it was strategic necessity. At least in the eyes of US officials, the Soviets were doing the same. In this new arms race, ethics took a backseat to power. But while some Nazi elites found new homes in science labs, others took far more secretive paths, vanishing into shadows that stretched across continents. After the fall of the Reich, many Nazi officers and collaborators fled justice using secret escape routes known as Ratlines. These underground networks were often aided by sympathetic church members, rogue intelligence agents, or corrupt officials. The most infamous destination, Argentina. Under President Juan Perón, Argentina quietly welcomed thousands of former Nazis. Some were given new identities, homes, and even government protection. But the trail didn't stop there. Nazis also escaped to Brazil, blending into large German-speaking communities, Paraguay and Chile, offering safe haven to men like Walter Rauff, Egypt and Syria, recruiting former SS and Gestapo agents to build intelligence services, Canada and Australia, where Nazi collaborators slipped through immigration systems, even Vatican City, where rogue clergy allegedly helped smuggle fugitives out of Europe. Some fugitives may have also passed through Namibia and Tanzania, former German colonies in Africa. While no major evidence supports organized escapes there, whispers of low-level Nazi migration remain part of the historical rumor mill. But what about the men who didn't flee and didn't die in prison? What happened when they finally returned home? For those who survived captivity and returned to Germany, they came back to a country that no longer felt like home. Cities were flattened, families broken, and Germany itself was split in two: West Germany under Allied influence, and East Germany under Soviet control. Former soldiers faced suspicion, shame, and trauma. Some were welcomed by families, others were viewed with disdain, especially those who had served in SS units or had been involved in known atrocities. In East Germany, returning POWs were often treated as security threats. Many were interrogated, monitored, or even rearrested. In the West, rehabilitation programs helped some veterans reintegrate, but the emotional scars remained. Many never spoke of what they saw. Some carried guilt, others bitterness. Post-traumatic stress, untreated and unrecognized, shaped an entire generation of men who had once marched under the Nazi flag. And yet, even decades later, not all stories were told. Some were simply lost. Today, over 1 million German soldiers remain unaccounted for, their bodies never recovered, their fate unknown. Some may have died anonymously in camps, others perhaps assumed new identities in far-off lands. Mass graves are still being discovered. Declassified documents continue to reveal shocking details. In 2025, forensic teams in Eastern Europe are still working to identify remains buried under decades of silence. For many families, the war never ended. Not really. The letters stopped. The names faded from record, but the uncertainty lingered for generations. World War II ended on paper, but for German soldiers, the war took on new forms: prison, exile, secrecy, or silence. Some met justice, some found redemption, others escaped it all. Their legacy remains complicated, tainted by ideology, but still deeply human. These were men who fought for a collapsing regime, then became shadows in a shattered world. For millions, the real war began after peace was declared, and it never truly ended. Thanks for watching The Lost Chapter. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe the past still matters. And remember, forgotten history makes unforgettable stories.